From the Lincoln Journal-Star, this is the Life in the Red podcast with Luke Mullin and Amie Just.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Life in the Red podcast. Luke Mullin and Amie Just back with you, here to recap the last 2 weeks in Nebraska athletics. A lot going on, Husker hoops. There's a lot of action over that period. Nebraska football, some roster adjustments as that spring semester began. And of course, for everybody here around Lincoln, that spring academic semester has started, students back on campus. So that's certainly an exciting time for everybody. And today we're talking mainly Husker hoops, what has happened with the Nebraska men's basketball team, long losing streak to break into there. We'll also preview 2 spring sports, softball and baseball, those seasons starting soon. But first, let's start off this week in Nebraska sports. Nebraska wrestling, really successful road trip to Michigan, took complete control over those 2 wrestling duels over Michigan and Michigan State. Last week, they host Wisconsin this Friday night. And then a quick football update for you. We kind of teased this, hinted at it last week, but Deshaun Singleton coming back to the Nebraska football team in 2025.
Yeah, I like it. I felt like on the field, I felt that he needed maybe like one more year. And they had tried, right, to get him an extra year, but the NCAA is a stickler for some reason about so many things and then no things at the same time. But I won't get into that. But yes, no, he's coming back thanks to the new blanket waiver for JUCO guys that didn't play 4 years at NCAA institution.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think that, like you said, that'll do him a lot of good, that NFL draft potential. He was thinking about that this year, but certainly he's been one of those key players in the Nebraska defense. So big boost for them. By the way, Isaiah Garcia Castaneda, he also got another year via that waiver. He has entered the transfer portal in recent days, was able to do so. Graduate transfers, they can still enter at any time. And as we talk about just kind of this roster briefly, there were some guys moving on, mainly graduates, guys who had already graduated, maybe had another year if they wanted to come back or not. Right now, the roster count, again, at the start of the spring semester, 132. It's got to be down to 105 in the fall.
Yeah.
They'll get there.
As I've said this whole time, like it's not just going to be a major bloodletting in the winter. Like post-spring into summer, there's going to be a lot of movement too.
Yep. So got to keep that in mind. That's what's going on with the football team right now. Again, they'll be going through winter workouts during this period. And a couple quick volleyball updates for you as well. Coaching update, Jordan Larson worked as a Nebraska assistant coach these last couple of years, stepping down from that role for next season.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised, but then again, I'm not at the same time. She has so much on her plate right now, including still playing, which I have never understood how she's been able to pull that off.
How are there enough hours in the day?
There aren't.
Yeah.
Jordan, I need to know your secrets. But yeah, no. So I am surprised because I know she loved it and she loved the team and she loved the women that she was working with and helping pour into them. But also I understand there is a lot on that woman's plate right now. And so to step away, I think will be a good thing for her time management. And I fully believe that the door is open if she wants to return at some point.
Yeah, I don't think that chapter is probably not done of her volleyball career. I look forward to seeing what happens there as Jordan Larson continues there. And for this Nebraska team moving forward, we had speculated, a couple of weeks ago, like, were they going to do anything in the transfer portal? It was quiet for a while, but Nebraska landed the one position you thought that maybe they were looking at. New right side hitter, Allie Check, coming over from Baylor. I think had over 250 kills last year. That was an NCAA tournament team. She's going to be an experienced player that Nebraska can probably plug into that lineup right away.
Yeah, this is the situation that I thought would transpire. Not necessarily the person, but a 1 or 2 year transfer at right side with experience just to kind of, it's not that there's a gap there, but to let the younger right sides develop. So yeah, I think this is going to be great for them. It's the one spot that they really needed after the departure of Merritt Beeson. So yeah, I'm not surprised in the slightest that they went after this.
Yep. And we'll see how that shakes out. It's kind of funny. We're here pretty much at the end of January, but spring volleyball, spring football, it's only so far away.
Later
those teams,
than normal,
Yep.
But it will be here before we know it.
Yep. Those teams, they're settling their roster, going through workouts. And again, we'll get a more good look at those roster, how those things will shake out That is your update around Nebraska sports. So let's get into the Husker Hoops action, starting with the women's basketball team. Of course, those injuries, Natalie Potts and then Allison Widener more recently, that really shook up how Nebraska was going to play. Well, I mean, they've responded so well to those injuries. It's been super impressive. Just looking at some of those recent results, they had that big kind of gutsy overtime win there on the road at Iowa, the big win over Wisconsin. They shot so well in that one, and then close loss to Ohio State recently. Just those last three games, just what have you thought about the level of play? It seemed really good from this Nebraska team.
Yeah, with Allison going down again, a lot more has been asked of Britt Prince, and she has delivered. Granted, the Ohio State game wasn't necessarily where she wanted it to be in terms of her shooting. She went 0 of 6 from deep, but she's still not, like, if the ball isn't going in for her, she's still figuring out other ways to show up. Her primary task was guarding their best player. Shut her down. Over. Number 2 player in her recruiting class. So that had to feel pretty good for Britt, even if things weren't going in the way she wanted to. Still, like, 8 points, 8 rebounds, several steals, several assists, more turnovers than she probably would have liked. But, she has really stepped up. And, last week she was not just the Big Ten Freshman of the Week, but the National Freshman of the Week. So Britt deserved it. She came up huge against Iowa and is continuing to show that there's a reason why she's as good as advertised. And she's continuing to get better and more confident, and that helps.
Yep. Clutch buckets, clutch free throws at the end of that Iowa game. And the basketball's in her hands a lot of the time, and she's doing good things with it. Most certainly, you look at that Wisconsin game, Nebraska shot 16 of 32 from 3-point range, by the way. So, I mean,
building record.
Yeah. Getting the ball to those shooters. They were all certainly in rhythm there. And, in terms of the minutes, we've seen Alberta Rimdahl. She's gotten more minutes too. Do you think that rotation is kind of just figured out now these last couple games? They've kind of figured out the right solution to that problem?
Yeah, I think so. And I wouldn't necessarily call it a problem. It's just, that's the situation that's presented, yep. Right? Trying to figure out who gets those minutes that Allison was having in that off the bench role. Are you spreading it out more against players who are already playing a lot, upping their roles a little bit? And I think you're seeing that too. More opportunities for Callan Hake, who played really well against Ohio State. More minutes for Logan Nisley, who didn't have her best game at Ohio State, but she kept shooting through it and, made a 3 late that really helped Nebraska get back into it. But yeah, you're starting to see that rotation shore up a little bit more, not because they want to, but out of necessity.
Yep, those guards have had to step up. And for this Nebraska team, next 2 games upcoming for them, they're on the road at Purdue this Thursday night. Purdue, by the way, 0-9 in Big Ten play, so Nebraska looking to avoid a letdown there on the road. Then they'll be at Indiana Sunday at 11 a.m.
And that's the toughest game that they have, in my opinion, for the rest of the way, is that game against Indiana. Going to be tough. That place is always hard to play. Indiana's good. And again, we're talking about the women, not the men. Indiana's good. And they've got a lot of really strong players. And I think that is going to be their toughest test. But what I said in January, I think holds really true right now. Early January, that's still January for some reason. Feels like February.
Yeah, this month has lasted forever.
It's lasted forever. Having USC and UCLA early is going to help them build momentum down the stretch, whereas so many other teams are having to play them later. So while, yes, there is a logjam in the Big Ten standings right now, the teams that Nebraska is tied with or close to being tied with still have yet to play those guys and or Ohio State. So going to be an interesting one down the stretch.
Yeah, great point. I mean, they had those run of ranked matchups for a while that really tested that team. So yeah, they can come out the other end and see a bunch of those other Big Ten teams. That will be interesting to follow. Again, that women's team playing at a high level right now. As we move on to the men's team, it's certainly dire. There's a lot of burning questions, and the one on everybody's minds: why can't Nebraska win a game right now? What's going wrong with this team?
Toughness is the reason that they have said. Me in watching them, I think their body language is bad. You go back and you look at their most recent game at home. Turn off the scoreboard. Just don't look at any of it in the last 2 minutes. You would have thought that Nebraska was losing by 12. They weren't. It was a 1-possession game until late. So I don't know, but they've got to get out of their own heads, which is hard to do, right? Easier said on the sidelines. But they've got to get out of their own heads because they're beating themselves with their bad body language and their lack of toughness. And they're better than this. Like, they should be in the top third of the Big Ten. And they're better than that. I mean, you look at a lot of their games and they're losing, like we've said in football, by single digits, single possessions, and they're just not closing it out, or they're running into the issue like they ran into at Wisconsin, and they get in such a hole deep that, like, a deep hole early that there's no way that they're climbing out of that. Like, even if they go on a 15-0 run like they have done previously, it's not going to be enough, and it's unfortunate because they should be better. They are better than this. But at the end of the day, your record is what it is. And that's who you are. And you're on the verge of potentially not making the Big Ten tournament, which is definitely not what any of us thought going into the season.
Yeah. I mean, it's 6 losses in a row since that big home win over UCLA that potentially felt like a turning point, right? I mean, in this team's season. And I'll get to the rotation against Wisconsin, the roster here in a moment. But, those close losses, right? I mean, the chance to win the game in the last possession, which has happened to them twice, recently in this streak.
And once earlier in the season, too.
It's just like, why can't they get a good last second shot off? Like, I mean, it seems something that you practice every day, right? I mean, what's the issue with, is it just the lack of like X factor for scoring? I mean, Bryce Williams has been that guy. The ball's been in his hands, but it just seems disjointed with those last minute possessions.
I think confidence has a thing to do with it. Yeah. Like, now that you're in this 6-game losing skid, like, are you questioning yourself? Like, I would, if they're not already, I would up the sports psych meetings because they're better than this. But do they know that they're better than this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You would think that they do, but sometimes that little voice in the back of your head is all you need to have things go the other way.
Mm-hmm. And something else that's relevant here is this Wisconsin game. Fred Hoiberg shakes up the starting lineup, and they get the doors blown off of them, in the first 5-10 minutes of that game. The lineup that Nebraska rolled out that game: Juwan Gary, Berkey Buchtengel, Bryce Williams, Sam Hoiberg, Andrew Morgan. Those were the starting 5. Braxton Mia, the usual starting center, didn't play. What did you make of that move from Hoiberg?
I was more interested with starting Sam.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I never thought that they would do that. He's deserved it with his play as of late, but I did not think he'd make that move. And this is the 3rd straight game where they've had different starting point guards. So, because it was, as it had been for most of the season, Raleigh Wooster. And then after Aaron Eulis played really well, they moved to Aaron. And then neither Raleigh or Aaron had particularly great games last week, so they moved to Sam for the Wisconsin game. You cannot be still figuring it out. It's almost February. It's one thing to try to be figuring it out in November, December, sure, right? But now,
well, this is something to me that, as we kind of reflect on this Nebraska team, I mean, ultimately, Fred Hoiberg, as he looks at this team, I think he has to ask to himself, like, did he get this roster construction wrong? Because ultimately, there's a lot of good players on this team. And like you said, I mean, they're maybe not playing to the level that they could, but I don't think the scoring, that's always been the question people had all year, right? I mean, where's the shooting? Where's the scoring going to come at? And you have this experienced core, those guys, Bryce Williams, Juwan Gary coming back. You want to add all these transfers to them. And he does a very good job at adding transfers every year, Fred Hoiberg does. But ultimately, I don't know if he got the mixture right this season.
Yeah. And Connor Essegian has shown at times that he has been the answer.
Yep, right.
But it's not every night. And it's not going to be every night. But it also can't just be him. You need more from Bryce. You need more from Juwan. You need more of an outside threat. And that just hasn't happened.
Yep. So for Nebraska right now, the record is 12-8. It's 2-7 in Big Ten play, 11 regular season games left. If we're talking about even making the Big Ten tournament, they're going to have to win a bunch of those. But I think just from basic level, what do you want to see from them in terms of their play on the court? How do you want the Nebraska basketball team to look?
Confident and tough. You have, again, like I said, go back a couple games ago, the last few minutes. Their heads are hanging. You cannot have that happen in a one possession game. You have to believe in yourself. I know things are tough right now, but if you don't believe in yourself, you've already lost. And then the toughness factor. It's the Big Ten. You have to be tough.
Yep. I mean, that's going to define these next 11 games. And there are some difficult ones, of course, coming up. Nebraska, they host Illinois Thursday. That is 7:30 p.m.
That's going to be rough.
Yep. We'll see what shakes out there. And then they head to the West Coast. Sunday, they're at Oregon. Wednesday, they're at Washington.
I see 2 more straight losses.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're going to need the defense, as always. That's their calling card. If they can hang tight, I think, they should be able to compete in those. But certainly in terms of a turnaround, they're going to need it sooner rather than later. The clock certainly ticking on that Big Ten tournament this season for Nebraska. So that's your Husker Hoops update as it is. And time to talk some spring sports here. Yes, they're starting up. It's still January, but they are starting here soon. Let's start with the Husker baseball team. We'll get on to Husker softball after that. And I think both of these teams, they're both some top 25 accolades around that spot. The Big Ten, not a nationally, marquee baseball or softball conference, but these new West Coast teams, they raise the profile as conference. And there are always some good NCAA tournament teams as well. So Husker baseball, I think one of the interesting things before we get into the roster, always the non-con is always so crucial for them. And then you get into the regular season, you get those Tuesday, Wednesday night, midweek games. Just interested to see how Nebraska does in the non-con, this baseball team. That opening weekend invitational that they have is going to be so huge for them to start off that year. But you look at this team and Mason McConaughey, the ace pitcher, he's one of the reasons why you think they're going to win a heck of a lot of games with him on the mound.
Oh, yeah, without question. He had a pretty productive season last year, and there's no reason to believe why he wouldn't be productive this year.
Yeah, I mean, talk about returning your number one arm, your Friday starter. Any team in the nation would love that, and he's going to settle into that role right away. But I'd be interested to see what happens with the rest of the pitching rotation. You have Will Walsh, who really came on strong last year. I think expect him maybe to be that Saturday guy. Drew Christo had some good starts for Nebraska as well. Unfortunately, he's been a little up and down over his Husker career, but the talent's always been there. And then Jackson Brockett, who, again, I mean, I think it was 2 years ago, he came on, had a series of starts. Last year was a little bit rough for him, came out of the bullpen a little bit, but, Nebraska, they trust in these guys. And I think he's certainly got the arm talent to go out there and start again.
Hitter.
So, yeah, I mean,
he can do it, right?
Absolutely.
I'm more worried about their midweek. Obviously, you got to shore up your weekend rotation, but midweek last year was not great.
Yeah, well, they just weren't able to find, 4 starters. I mean, Caleb Clark was a guy that they really wanted to start last year, left-hander. We'll see what happens to him this year, if he can maybe be that midweek guy, because they had to take him out of the rotation because the struggles were there. But I think what's going to help is some of the bullpen depth. I think looks really good this year to me. You've got a guy like Ty Horn, who they were big about. The ERA was probably a little bit higher last year than they'd like. And then a couple in-state guys, Jalen Worley from here in Lincoln, really great left-hander. He's come on some big, 2-3 inning relief appearances last year. And I don't think they wanted to put too much on his arm. So I think he could be even more impactful out of the bullpen this year. And then Tucker Timmerman, he throws
what
gas.
A name.
He throws gas.
What a name. That is a great baseball name.
He could very well be the closer for this team. Tucker Timmerman, the closer. Yeah, I mean, that just sounds right, doesn't it?
It does.
But from Beatrice, throws a great fastball. Very interested to see what he does. He did very well in a small sample size last year. And then quickly to run through some of the hitting, so many veteran bats. I mean, coming back to this lineup, you look at Gabe Swanson, kind of that power hitter. He's going to clean up a lot of that in the lineup. And then you got Veteran infielders, Dylan Carey could be back. Shortstop, Tyler Stone might be the first baseman. Caden Brumbaugh, Rhett Stokes competing for that second base spot. Hogan Haliko, he's the senior transfer.
Also, another great name.
Yep.
Hogan.
Yes.
That's a baseball guy.
Yep. But you got to love a little bit of the in-state here, coming from Creighton, going to Nebraska.
Spicy.
Yep. He's going to start behind the dish in all likelihood. Really strong player there as well. And then two other guys, Will Jeske, Max Butenbach, two Lincoln Southeast grads.
Go Knights.
Yep. Had to throw that in there. Yeah, we got the Lincoln Southeast plug on the pod today. Yep. Local talent, they'll make an impact. Again, both those guys, they got some work last year. A lot of these players on the team, summer ball, so important. So, I mean, for this Nebraska baseball team, compete for the Big Ten, make the NCAA tournament. I think that's the general expectations.
Yeah. And as it stands right now, obviously things can change, right? But there's no reason why they can't. Like, set the goal. They could get there. They really could. Now, it's probably an outside shot for them to, like, try to host. But I know that's the goal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, we'll see what happens. But got to figure out midweek.
Yeah. I mean, so much is going to come down to the non-con too, your RPI. We've seen the strong start that they had to the year. You know, they were number one in the RPI. They were top 10 in the RPI for so long. So we'll see what Nebraska can do with that non-con slate again. This Husker baseball team hoping to make it back to the NCAA tournament. And that's also the case for Nebraska softball. Missed out on the tournament last year. So many injuries. Mm-hmm. We were kind of in disbelief down the stretch at
just like how
at the frequency.
How?
Yeah.
What?
I mean, they could barely field a bench during the Big Ten tournament. I forget. I think it was like they had like 3 players on the bench.
Yeah, it was not great.
Yeah. It was obscene what happened to this Nebraska softball team in terms of injuries. But they're healthy. They added a lot of players to this team. Yeah, as far as we know. I didn't proclaim anything about the season, but certainly they added a lot of talent to this team. And the reason for some big expectations, again, top 25 rankings, Jordy Ball, she's back. And people forget, you know, right? She got injured in game 1 last year, which is just ridiculous for something like that to happen. But don't anybody forget, for 2 years before that, she was the best pitcher in college softball.
Yep.
The best.
Yep.
So if Jordy Ball comes back and is able to pitch the amount of innings that Nebraska wants to get out of her, I mean, that's the reason for optimism alone. Before you even get into all the other talent this team has, Jordy Ball, she's going to win a lot of games.
Yeah, without question. And she looked good in the fall too, which she was ahead of schedule. We're sitting there at their first like scrimmage, and we're like, "Wait, is that
what's she doing out there?" Yeah.
So her being ahead of schedule is always good. She was always in line to be ready for softball season, for like actual softball season, not necessarily fall ball. But yeah, she looked great in the fall. Still finding her footing a little bit, but again, she hadn't pitched in forever. So I'm excited to see what she can do in the circle this year. I know the expectations are sky high for this team, especially with her being healthy. And then just all of the other pieces that are around her, I think makes for what could be an exciting year.
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, Ball, she'll have the majority of those innings inside the circle, but she can't do it alone.
Nope.
Most certainly cannot. And Nebraska was hoping to have a lot more pitching depth. That was key issue that hurt them down the stretch last year.
Well, when all your pitchers are hurt.
Yeah, I know. Well, they went out and added a key impact transfer, Kylie McGee, threw a lot of innings there at Arizona State last year. She's a little bit getting back to health, was a little bit affected there over the spring. Again, so we'll expect to see a lot of her. Hannah Kamenzen, she comes from Arkansas. And then the sophomores, Caitlin Olensky and Emerson Cope, both of those pitched a little bit last year. I think McGee should potentially start a lot of those games. Really liked what we saw out of Olensky last year. And I think it was about 40, 50 innings before she had to shut her season down. She was really impressive as a freshman too. So Rhonda Ravel is going to really like how that pitching rotation sets up. And then if we look at the hitting too, this lineup, a lot of veterans coming back. And I think in particular, you look at, yes, they lost Billy Andrews, right? I mean, you lose the all-time home run hitter. This lineup's not going to be the same, right? Well, it's not going to be the same in that there's not one person who you count, oh yeah, she's going to, hit almost 500. She's going to hit all these homers. I think it's going to be spread out across this entire lineup, which I think has raised its ceiling a little bit. Briefly running through that, Ava Bradwell and Olivia DiNardo, they'll kind of platoon there at catcher. DiNardo, she brings a lot of power there. She's a big-time transfer from Arizona. In the infield, Bella Bacon, Kate Kaneda, they're back, first and second base, potential starters there. Shortstop, where Billy Andrews played last year, I think you're looking at either Sammy Bland, who played in the outfield a year ago, as well Ava Cusack, experienced transfer from Wisconsin. She could start there or at third base. So again, I'll be interested to ask Rhonda Revelle some of the details there, but Lauren Kamenson from Arkansas as well, another infielder. And then I was able to see a little bit of the Nebraska softball scrimmage. They had a team scrimmage about a week ago, and freshman Natalia Hill, she was playing shortstop. I mean, she covered ground like crazy. I was like, man, I'm not going to count out some big time plays from her this year. So those are your names to watch in the infield. And then the outfield, a lot of interesting decisions to be made here. Abby Squire, Talia Tokheim, Dakota Carter, all back from injury.
Last year.
Yeah, the amount of games missed by that outfield alone, way too much. Casey Hoffman, transfer from Arkansas. Sammy Bland, again, could continue. She played left field last year. So there's going to be some interesting decisions to make there in the outfield. But look at this lineup, top to down, so strong. Emerson Cope, probably the designated player. She's going to hit a lot of homers this year as well.
I love her bat.
Yep. Big time pop in that bat. And this season, whereas the baseball team, they don't start until February 14th. Nebraska softball, they start next week, Thursday, February 6th.
Like in disbelief that it's here already.
February 6th. That's opening day for softball.
Wild.
Yeah. So they will be down. They'll be playing Tennessee, Texas Tech. Those are two top 25 teams.
Texas Tech is on national television. MLB Network, right?
Yeah. Yep. MLB Network.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's go. How about that? That's going to be super fun.
Yeah. Very cool. The NFCA Leadoff Classic that they're a part of there. And as we said, for the expectations for this team, well, I think Big Ten compete for it. And I think ultimately, if the season goes as well as they want, they're going to want to host a regional for this Nebraska softball team.
I think they can. I think the pieces are there. They just have to figure out how they come together.
Yes, most certainly. So we'll be excited to follow that team. And they'll have a preseason fan day and media availability this Saturday. So we'll hear more from Nebraska softball here from Rhonda Revelle. All that content, all those updates for you will be there at journalstar.com. Expecting to talk to Matt Rule this Saturday as well. So any football updates for you as well will be there. And so I think that'll do it for today's episode of the Life in the Red podcast. Appreciate all of you listeners and viewers out there, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's Life in the Red podcast. Our theme music is composed by Sasha Indy. The stories continue on journalstar.com.